Princess Lyrelei stood at the tall windows of the Crystal Palace, watching the twin suns of Zephyria Prime set over the singing gardens. The crystalline flowers chimed softly in the evening breeze, their melody reflecting her troubled thoughts. Her reflection stared back at her from the glace moire pale blue skin that shimmered like starlight, silver hair that moved like liquid mercury, and eyes the color of deep space. She was beautiful by any standard in the galaxy, but beauty meant nothing now. Daughter. The voice of High Counselor Varian, her father, cut through her thoughts like a blade. She turned to see him approach, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him. His face bore the same crystalline features as hers, but time had carved worry lines around his ancient eyes. "Father," she said, bowing her head in the traditional greeting, "you look troubled." "We are all troubled these days," he replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. "The Korthak Empire grows bolder with each passing cycle. Their war fleets mass at our borders, and our people fear for their lives." Lyrelei knew this already. The entire galaxy had heard of the Korthak expansion. They were a warrior race, cruel and merciless, who conquered worlds and enslaved the survivors. For generations, they had been held back by the combined fleets of the Galactic Alliance. But something had changed. "The Alliance forces are stretched thin," her father continued. "The Korthak have new weapons, new ships. They have already taken 3 systems in the Outer Rim. Our military analysts believe Zephyria Prime could be next." A chill ran down Lyrelei's spine. Zephyria Prime was one of the most beautiful worlds in the galaxy, with its crystal cities and telepathic gardens. The thought of Korthak boots marching through these sacred halls made her feel sick. "But there is hope," Varian said, his voice carefully neutral. "The humans have offered to help." Lyrelei blinked in surprise. "The humans? But father, they are." She struggled for words. Like most civilized beings in the galaxy, she had grown up hearing stories about humans. They were primitive, violent creatures from a backwater world called Earth. They had only recently achieved faster than light travel, and were considered barely more than animals by most advanced species. "I know what you are thinking," her father said, "but the humans have surprised everyone. 3 months ago, a single human fleet destroyed an entire Korthak battle group that was attacking a mining colony. They used tactics no one had ever seen before. Wild, unpredictable strategies that confused even the Korthak war minds. One victory does not make them our equals," Lyrelei said, though she was curious despite herself. "It was not just one victory," Varian replied. "In the past month, human forces have won 4 major battles against the Korthak. Each time they were outnumbered. Each time, they should have lost. But they adapt faster than any species we have ever encountered. When the Korthak developed new shield frequencies, the humans changed their weapons overnight. When the Korthak used swarm tactics, the humans invented new formations in the middle of battle." Lyrelei felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. What did they want in return for their help? Her father was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with sorrow. "An alliance, a formal treaty that binds our people together, and to seal that alliance." He paused, unable to meet her eyes. "They want a marriage, a union between their military commander and a member of our royal family." The words hit Lyrelei like a physical blow. She gripped the window frame, her knuckles turning white. "No," she whispered. "Father, you cannot mean a—" "I am sorry, my daughter. The council has already voted. You are to be wed to Commander Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation. The ceremony will take place in 1 month." Lyrelei's mind reeled. She had always known that her marriage would be political, but she had hoped it would be to someone from a civilized species. The Altarians were elegant poets. The Centaurians were brilliant scientists. Even the Dracones, for all their warrior culture, had honor and nobility, but humans, they were barely above the level of wild beasts. "I have heard stories," she said, her voice shaking. "They are violent, unpredictable. They have no telepathic abilities, which means they are unable to truly connect with others. They are driven by primitive emotions, anger, jealousy, lust, and their males." She shuddered. "I have heard they dominate their females, treat them as property." "Those are just stories," her father said. But his voice lacked conviction. Are they? Lyrelai turned to face him. The Betazoids have traded with them. They say human minds are chaotic, filled with violent impulses. The Vulcarians refuse to allow humans on their diplomatic stations because they cannot control their emotions. Even the Jorvians, who accept everyone, have restricted human access to their holy sites, because they fear humans will desecrate them. Varian sighed deeply. Perhaps those stories are true. Perhaps they are not. But what I know for certain is this. Without human military support, our people will be enslaved or slaughtered by the Korthak within the year. The choice is not between a good marriage and a bad one, daughter. The choice is between an uncertain future and no future at all. Lyrelai closed her eyes, feeling tears gather behind her eyelids. In Zephyrian culture, tears were precious. They formed small crystals that were considered sacred. She did not want to waste them on this moment. What is he like? She asked finally. This Commander Chen? I have only seen his service record, her father replied. He is 32 years old by human standards. He has served in their military for 14 years, rising through the ranks quickly. He has never been married, which is unusual for humans of his age. His psychological evaluations rate him as highly intelligent and emotionally stable, though I confess I do not fully understand human psychology. Has he been told about me? Yes. His government sent a message accepting the marriage proposal immediately. They seemed eager for the alliance. Lyrelai felt another wave of fear. Of course they were eager. What human wouldn't want to claim a Zephyrian princess as a trophy? She had heard that humans collected beautiful things the way the Korthak collected slaves. When will he arrive? She asked. In 1 week. There will be a formal meeting in the Great Hall, followed by traditional negotiations between our peoples. You will have several opportunities to meet with him before the wedding ceremony. A week. 7 days to prepare herself for a lifetime bound to an alien creature she could never truly understand. 7 days to accept that her dreams of a loving partnership with someone who could touch her mind as well as her heart were over. May I ask one favor, Father? Of course. I would like to visit the Temple of First Light before he arrives. I want to pray to the ancestors for guidance. Varian nodded slowly. That would be wise. Perhaps they will help you find peace with this decision. After her father left, Lyrelai remained at the window as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere among those points of light was Earth, the world that had produced the man who would soon be her husband. She tried to imagine what he looked like, what his voice sounded like, what his touch would feel like. Every image that came to mind filled her with dread. In the distance, she could hear the night singers beginning their evening chorus. The crystalline beings lived in the mountain peaks surrounding the capital city, and their songs were said to carry the voices of the ancestors. Tonight, their melody seemed sadder than usual, as if they were mourning for her lost freedom. Lyrelai pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered a prayer to the first light, the ancient energy that had given birth to her people. Please, she said softly, if this marriage must happen, please let him be kind. I do not ask. For love, I know that is impossible between our species. But please let him be gentle with me. The stars offered no answer, but somewhere in the back of her mind she thought she felt a faint stirring of something that might have been hope. It was probably just wishful thinking, but she held on to it anyway. In the days to come, it might be all she had. Outside her window, the singing gardens continued their eternal melody, unchanged by the political machinations of mortals. But for Princess Lyrelai, everything had changed. In 1 week, she would meet the human who would become her husband. In 1 month, she would be bound to him forever. And somewhere beyond the stars, the Korthak fleets continued their relentless advance toward her home. The future was coming whether she was ready or not. The morning of Commander Chen's arrival dawned clear and bright over Zephyria Prime. Princess Lyrelai had spent the night in the Temple of First Light, seeking guidance from the ancestors, but their crystal voices had remained silent. Now she stood in her private chambers, allowing her servants to dress her in the formal robes of state, flowing garments of silver and blue that caught the light like captured starlight. You look beautiful, Your Highness, said Mira, her oldest friend and lady-in-waiting. The human will be honored to meet you. Lyrelai studied herself in the mirror. The ceremonial robes were magnificent. designed to showcase the natural luminescence of Zephyrian skin. But she wondered if humans even appreciated such things or if they only understood crude displays of wealth and power. "Have you ever seen a human, Mira?" she asked. "No, Your Highness, but I have heard they are much shorter than us with thick, heavy bodies, and their skin does not glow. It is said to be the color of mud or tree bark." Lyrelai shuddered slightly. Zephyrians were tall and slender, with skin that shimmered with inner light. The idea of touching someone with dull, lifeless skin made her feel uncomfortable. A soft chime echoed through the palace, signaling the arrival of the human transport ship. Lyrelai's heart began to race. In just a few hours, she would come face to face with the creature who would become her husband. The formal meeting was to take place in the Great Hall, the most magnificent chamber in the Crystal Palace. As Lyrelai entered, she was struck once again by its beauty. The walls were carved from living crystal that sang softly in harmony with the movements of those within. The ceiling soared high above, decorated with floating lights that danced like captured stars. It was a place designed to inspire awe and reverence. High Counselor Varian stood at the center of the hall, flanked by the other members of the ruling council. Lyrelai took her place at his side, trying to project the calm dignity expected of a Zephyrian princess. But inside, her thoughts churned with anxiety. The great doors opened with a sound like distant thunder. A small group of humans entered, escorted by Zephyrian guards. Lyrelai held her breath, waiting to see the savage warrior who would claim her as his prize. The humans were indeed shorter than Zephyrians, but not as short as she had expected. They moved with purpose and discipline, their dark uniforms crisp and clean. At their head walked a man who could only be Commander Chen. Lyrelai's first thought was surprise. He was not the hulking brute she had imagined. He was tall for a human, with a lean build that suggested strength without brutality. His skin was indeed darker than hers, a warm brown color that reminded her of the wooden sculptures in the palace art collection. His hair was black and cut short in a military style, and his face was angular but not unpleasant. But what surprised her most were his eyes. She had expected to see the cold, predatory gaze of a conqueror. Instead, she saw intelligence, caution, and something that looked almost like nervousness. When his gaze met hers across the hall, he immediately looked away, as if he were the one who was afraid. The formal introductions began. High Counselor Varian spoke the ancient words of greeting, his voice carrying clearly through the crystal chambers. Commander Chen responded in carefully pronounced Zephyrian, though his accent was heavy and his grammar imperfect. "Honored Counselor," he said, bowing deeply, "I am grateful for your welcome. I come in peace, seeking understanding between our peoples." Lyrelai blinked in surprise. He had spoken their language. Badly, but he had made the effort. Most alien diplomats used universal translators, and never bothered to learn even basic courtesy phrases in Zephyrian. The formal negotiations would take place over the next several days, but first there was to be a private meeting between Lyrelai and her intended husband. A small chamber off the Great Hall had been prepared for this purpose, with traditional Zephyrian furnishings and soft lighting that complemented their natural glow. As they entered the chamber, Lyrelai noticed that Commander Chen moved carefully, avoiding the delicate crystal decorations that adorned the walls. His steps were measured and deliberate, as if he were afraid of damaging something precious. This was not what she had expected from a human, or weren't they supposed to be clumsy and destructive? They sat across from each other at a low table carved from a single piece of living crystal. For a moment, neither spoke. Lyrelai studied his face, trying to read the alien expressions. His eyes kept moving around the room, taking in every detail with what looked like genuine appreciation. "Your palace is beautiful," he said finally, speaking in accented but understandable galactic standard. "I have never seen architecture like this. The way the light moves through the crystal, it's like being inside a living jewel. You find it pleasing?" Lyrelai asked, surprised by his response. "More than pleasing. It's magnificent. On Earth we have nothing that compares to this artistry." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I hope I can learn to appreciate it properly. I know I must seem very crude to you." The admission caught her off guard. She had expected arrogance, demands, perhaps crude comments about her appearance. She had not expected humility or self-awareness. "You speak our language," she observed. That was unexpected. A faint color appeared in his cheeks. Oh, what humans called blushing, she realized. "I've been studying for 6 months, ever since the marriage proposal was first discussed. I'm not very good at it yet, but I wanted to show respect for your culture. I know how important proper forms are to your people. 6 months. He had been preparing for this meeting for 6 months, learning her language and studying her culture. Lyra Lee felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite relief, but perhaps a lessening of dread. May I ask you something? He said hesitantly. She nodded. Are you afraid of me? The direct question startled her. In Zephyrian culture, such personal matters were approached gradually, with careful attention to social protocols. But there was something about his quiet sincerity that made her want to answer honestly. Yes, she said simply. He nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. I understand. I've read about your people, Armo, how peaceful you are, how you value harmony and telepathic connection. I know that humans have a reputation for violence and unpredictability. I know that I can never touch your mind the way others of your species can. Then why did you agree to this marriage? She asked. Because my people need this alliance, he said. The Korthak are a threat to everyone in this galaxy, including Earth, but also... He hesitated, then continued. Because I hoped that even if we could never have the kind of mental connection you're used to, we might find some other way to understand each other. Before Lyra Lee could respond, a soft crystalline sound filled the air. She looked around in alarm. It was the sound of crystal breaking, but nothing in the room appeared damaged. Then she saw it. On the table between them, her ceremonial pendanta, a delicate crystal flower that had been passed down through her family for generations, had fallen from its chain. It lay on the crystal surface, its petals scattered like frozen tears. Lirelai gasped, reaching for the broken pieces. The pendant was priceless, irreplaceable. Her ancestors had worn it at their weddings for 1,000 years. And now, at the first meeting with her intended husband, it had shattered. But before her fingers could touch the fragments, Commander Chen's hand appeared. He moved slowly, carefully, gathering the scattered pieces with a gentleness that surprised her. His fingers were steady and sure as he collected even the smallest fragments. I'm sorry, he said softly. This was precious to you. It belonged to my ancestors, she whispered, fighting back tears. Every Zephyrian princess has worn it at her wedding for 1,000 years. Commander Chen carefully placed all the pieces in the palm of his hand, then studied them with the intensity of a scientist. The break is clean, he said finally. It can be repaired. On Earth, we have techniques for mending crystal without leaving scars. If you would permit me, I could arrange for it to be fixed. You would do that? Of course. He looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. I know this marriage wasn't your choice. I know you probably wish you were marrying someone of your own species, someone who could share your telepathic gifts. I can't give you that. But I can promise you this. I will never deliberately cause you pain, and I will do everything in my power to honor what is precious to you. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Lyra found herself studying his face more carefully, looking past her preconceptions to see the individual beneath. His features were alien, yes, but not brutish. His expression was open and honest in a way that reminded her of the younger students at the academy. I have heard stories about human males, she said carefully, that they are possessive and dominating, that they treat their females as property. Commander Chen's expression darkened. Some do, he said honestly. Just as some males of every species abuse their power. But not all of us. I was raised by a strong mother who taught me to respect others regardless of their gender or species. I hope to prove to you that humans are capable of honor and gentleness. As if to emphasize his words, he held out the broken crystal pendant with both hands, offering it to her like a sacred gift. His movements were careful and reverent, showing the same respect she would expect from a priest handling holy relics. Lyra Lee accepted the pendant, their fingers briefly to over the next several days. Princess Lyra Lee found herself looking forward to her meetings with Commander Chen in ways that surprised her. Each formal session revealed new depths to the human that challenged everything she thought she knew about his species. During their third meeting, he presented her with her restored pendant. But what took her breath away was not just that it had been perfectly repaired. It was that he had somehow managed to enhance it. The crystal now sang with a pure, clear note when light touched it, something it had never done before. How did you do this? She asked, holding the pendant up to catch the light streaming through the crystal windows. Marcus smiled. The first genuine smile she had seen from him. I studied the molecular structure of your crystal formations and found that adding certain harmonic frequencies during the repair process could activate dormant resonance patterns. I hope that was appropriate. I wanted to give you something new along with something old. Lyrelay stared at him in amazement. You enhanced a 1,000-year-old family heirloom using human technology, and it still maintains its spiritual properties? I was very careful to preserve the original crystal matrix, he said. I would never want to damage something so precious to your family. That afternoon, Lyrelay decided to test him. She invited him to walk through the contemplation gardens, a sacred space where few aliens had ever been permitted. The gardens were filled with living crystal formations that responded to telepathic energy, creating music and light shows that reflected the emotional state of visitors. She expected the crystals to remain silent in the presence of a non-telepathic being. Instead, as Marcus walked among them, the formations began to glow with a soft, warm light. Not the brilliant displays they created for telepaths, but something gentler, as if they were responding to his careful respect rather than his mental energy. This is impossible, she murmured. Watching crystal flowers bloom in his wake, is it wrong? Marcus asked, stopping immediately. Should I leave? No, it's just... The crystals have never responded to anyone without telepathic abilities before. They're reacting to something about you, but I don't understand what. Marcus studied the glowing formations with scientific interest. Perhaps they're responding to bioelectric fields rather than telepathic energy. Human neural activity produces electromagnetic signatures that might resonate with crystal structures under the right conditions. His explanation showed the kind of respectful curiosity that seemed to characterize everything he did. Where other species might have dismissed Zephyrian crystal gardens as primitive magic, Marcus sought to understand them scientifically while still respecting their spiritual significance. On the fourth day, Lyrelay fell ill. It was not uncommon for Zephyrians to experience stress-related ailments during times of emotional turmoil, and her body had finally succumbed to the pressure of the approaching marriage. She awakened with a severe headache, nausea, and skin that had lost its natural luminescence, a sure sign of telepathic exhaustion. When her servants informed Commander Chen that their scheduled meeting would need to be postponed, she expected him to be angry or at least frustrated. Political marriages required careful timing, and any delays could disrupt the larger treaty negotiations. Instead, Marcus immediately asked if there was anything he could do to help. When told that Zephyrian healing required quiet, darkness, and specific herbal treatments, he surprised everyone by canceling all his scheduled meetings with the diplomatic corps. The princess's health is more important than politics, he told the concerned diplomats. The treaty can wait. But what amazed Lyrelay's servants even more was what happened next. Marcus appeared at the door of her chambers carrying a tray of traditional Zephyrian healing foods, delicate broths made from crystal fruit and mineral-rich waters from the sacred springs. He had somehow learned to prepare them himself. I studied your medical traditions, he explained to Mira, who stood gaping in the doorway. I thought she might prefer food prepared by someone who understands its significance, rather than just following a recipe. Lyrelay, lying in her darkened chamber, heard this exchange and felt something strange stirring in her chest. The foods Marcus had prepared were not just nutritionally appropriate. They were prepared according to the ritual methods used by Zephyrian healers, complete with the proper prayers and crystal song accompaniment. When Mira brought her the tray, Lyrelay could taste the difference. These were not just foods made by an alien following instructions. They had been prepared with genuine understanding and care. Over the next 2 days, as she recovered, Marcus visited her chambers each morning and evening. He never intruded or demanded her attention. Instead, he would sit quietly in the outer chamber and read aloud from Zephyrian poetry and literature, works he had somehow learned to pronounce correctly. Despite the complex tonal requirements of her language, his voice, though accented, had a soothing quality that helped ease her headaches, and his choice of readings showed remarkable insight into Zephyrian culture. He read from the meditation cycles, ancient poems designed to promote healing and inner peace. He read from the Chronicles of Light, historical accounts of their ancestors' greatest achievements. Most surprisingly, he read from the Songs of Solitude, deeply personal poetry traditionally shared only between close friends or family members. Where did you learn these works? She asked on the second evening, when she felt well enough to sit up and talk. Marcus closed the book he had been reading from me. A leather-bound collection of classical Zephyrian literature. I've been studying them for months. I wanted to understand your people's heart, not just your politics. These books are not easy to obtain off-world, Lyrelay observed. The songs of solitude especially are considered too personal for alien study. I asked the Zephyrian ambassador to Earth for recommendations, Marcus admitted. I told him I wanted to be worthy of my future wife's respect. He was initially skeptical, but when he saw how seriously I was studying, he began sharing more advanced texts. Lyrelai felt her breath catch. You convinced Ambassador Thailand to teach you? He has turned away diplomats from a dozen worlds who wanted to study our culture. I think he appreciated my persistence, Marcus said with a small smile. I may have also convinced him that not all humans are barbarians when he saw me spend 3 weeks learning to properly pronounce the ritual of dawn greeting. You know the ritual of dawn greeting? Lyrelai stared at him in disbelief. The ritual was incredibly complex, requiring precise tonal control and understanding of subtle cultural meanings that most Zephyrians didn't master until adulthood. In response, Marcus stood and performed the ritual perfectly, from the opening gesture of respect to the final blessing for the day ahead. His pronunciation was careful and accurate, and his movements showed genuine understanding of what each gesture meant. How long did it take you to learn that? She asked, genuinely awed. About 2 months, he admitted. Ambassador Thalen said it usually takes Zephyrian children 3 years to learn it properly. But I had strong motivation to succeed. That night, for the first time since learning of her engagement, Lyrelai lay in bed without dreading her future. She was still not ready to call what she felt for Marcus affection, but her fear had been replaced by something closer to curiosity. On the 7th day, she was well enough to resume their formal meetings. But when she arrived at the appointed chamber, she found Marcus arranging crystal resonators in a specific pattern around the room. What are you doing? She asked. Creating a harmonic environment that should be more comfortable for you while you're still recovering, he said, making minute adjustments to the crystal placement. I noticed that you seemed more at ease when the ambient crystal song was tuned to the healing frequencies. I thought this might help. Lyrelai felt her luminescence flicker with surprise. Crystal resonance was an advanced aspect of Zephyrian science that most aliens never even attempted to understand. Yet Marcus had not only learned the theory but was applying it practically for her benefit. You studied crystal resonance theory? She asked. I studied everything I could find about your people, Marcus replied simply. Your music, your art, your science, your philosophy, your history. I wanted to understand what made Zephyria Prime so special, that it was worth fighting the Korthak to protect. And what did you conclude? Marcus paused in his crystal arrangements and looked directly at her. I concluded that you are a people who have learned to live in harmony with beauty, wisdom, and each other. You've created a civilization based on understanding rather than domination, and I concluded that anyone who would destroy that harmony is an enemy worth fighting. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Lyrelai felt something she had not expected. Pride that her culture was appreciated by this alien man who had worked so hard to understand it. There is something I must ask you, she said carefully. Your people could have demanded almost anything from us in exchange for their military aid. Why specifically request a marriage alliance? Why not territory or resources or technology? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, finishing his adjustment of the final crystal. The wedding day dawned with perfect crystalline clarity over Zephyria Prime. Princess Lyrelai stood in her chambers as her attendants helped her into the traditional bridal robes, flowing garments of pure white crystal silk that had been woven by the temple priestesses over the course of 3 months. The fabric caught and amplified her natural luminescence, making her appear as if she were carved from living starlight. But despite the beauty of the moment, Lyrelai felt nervous tension building in her chest. Today she would be bound to Marcus Chen in ceremonies that would unite not just 2 individuals, but 2 entire species. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like the gravity of a heavy world. You look radiant, Your Highness, said Mira, adjusting the final fold of the bridal veil. Commander Chen will be speechless when he sees you. Lyrelai touched the restored pendant at her throat, the one Marcus had repaired and enhanced. It sang softly in harmony with her heartbeat, a sound that somehow brought her comfort. Over the past 2 weeks, her feelings about this marriage had continued to evolve. What had begun as terror and progressed through curiosity had now settled into something she could only call cautious hope. Marcus had proven himself to be everything he had promised: respectful, intelligent, and genuinely interested in her culture. But marriage was different from diplomatic meetings. Soon they would be bound together in the most intimate of partnerships, and she still was not sure how that would work between species so different. The ceremony was to take place in the great Temple of First Light, the most sacred site on Zephyria Prime. As Lirelai made her way through the crystal corridors of the palace, she could hear the sounds of celebration echoing through the halls. Representatives from dozens of worlds had come to witness this historic alliance, and the crystal chambers rang with the voices of 1,000 different species. But when she entered the temple, all the noise faded away. The great temple was a marvel of Zephyrian architecture, a vast chamber carved from a single enormous crystal geode, with walls that rose hundreds of meters overhead and sang in harmonies that touched the soul. At the center of the temple, surrounded by floating lights that danced like captive stars, stood Marcus. Lirelai caught her breath. She had never seen him in formal attire before. He wore the traditional robes of a Zephyrian bridegroom, an honor that had surprised the diplomatic corps, as most alien dignitaries insisted on wearing the clothing of their own cultures. But Marcus had studied Zephyrian wedding customs with the same dedication he brought to everything else, and he had requested permission to dress according to their traditions. The robes suited him remarkably well. The deep blue fabric complemented his dark hair and skin, while the silver threading picked up the light in ways that made him seem almost luminescent. He had even learned to wear the ceremonial crystal circlet properly, and Lirelai realized with amazement that he somehow looked natural in Zephyrian formal wear. As she approached the altar, their eyes met across the temple. Marcus smiled, not the careful diplomatic expression she had grown used to, but a genuine smile of joy and wonder. He looked at her as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and for the first time, Lirelai felt truly glad that she was marrying this man. The ceremony began with the Chant of Beginnings, an ancient song that told the story of the First Light and how it had given birth to the Zephyrian people. Lirelai expected Marcus to stand silently during this part, as most aliens did during religious ceremonies they could not understand. Instead, to her amazement, he joined in the chant. His pronunciation was careful and his accent was still noticeable, but he knew the words. All of them. The complex harmonies, the ritual responses, the sacred verses that even some Zephyrians struggled to remember correctly. He had memorized the entire ceremony. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembled witnesses. Even High Counselor Varian looked impressed as Marcus demonstrated his knowledge of their most sacred traditions. The ceremony continued through the exchange of crystals, where bride and groom each offered a piece of their personal crystal collection to symbolize the joining of their life energies. Lirelai offered a small singing crystal that had been attuned to her personal frequency since childhood. Marcus offered a crystal that made her gasp in surprise. It was a perfectly formed harmony stone from the deepest caves of Zephyria Prime, the kind that took centuries to grow and was considered almost priceless. "Where did you get this?" she whispered as they exchanged crystals. "I asked your father for permission to enter the sacred caves and select one myself," Marcus replied quietly. "I wanted to offer you something that came from the heart of your world." The fact that he had been allowed into the sacred, Kevsa that her father had trusted him with that honor told Lirelai everything she needed to know about how much Marcus had won the respect of her people. The final part of the ceremony was the joining of lights, where the bride and groom each held a crystal resonator and created a harmonic frequency that would represent their united bond. Lirelai had worried about this part, since Marcus lacked the telepathic abilities traditionally used to control crystal resonance. But once again, Marcus surprised her. He had learned to manipulate crystal harmonics through careful study of frequency patterns and bioelectric control. As they each held their resonators, their combined energies created a sound unlike anything Lirelai had ever heard. Not the pure telepathic harmonies she was used to, but something new and beautiful that seemed to represent the merging of two very different kinds of consciousness. When the ceremony concluded, and they were declared husband and wife, Marcus leaned forward to give her the traditional kiss of bonding. His lips were warm against hers and his touch was gentle and reverent. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Lirelai felt a connection unlike anything she had experienced before. Not telepathic, but something deeper and more fundamental. As they turned to face the assembled witnesses, the crowd erupted in celebration. Crystal chimes rang throughout the temple, and the floating lights above them burst into brilliant displays of color and movement. It was a moment of perfect joy and harmony. And then the alarm crystals began to sound. The celebration stopped instantly, as the urgent harmonic warning echoed through the temple. Lorelei felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the pattern of enemy ships in the system, approaching fast. High Counselor Varian stepped forward, his face grave. "We have received an emergency communication from the orbital defense stations. A Korthak battle fleet has entered the system. They are demanding our immediate surrender." Marcus was already moving, his hand going to the communication device at his belt. "How many ships?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp and military. 57 capital vessels and over 200 support craft, came the reply from the orbital stations. "They have us outnumbered 3-1. A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled crowd. This was exactly what they had all dreaded. The Korthak had chosen this moment, when representatives from across the galaxy were gathered on Zephyria Prime, to launch their attack. "Commander Chen," High Counselor Varian said formally, "the defense of our world now rests with the alliance our peoples have just sealed. Will the humans honor their commitment?" Marcus straightened, and Lorelei saw the transformation from bridegroom to military commander happen in an instant. "The humans will honor their commitment," he said firmly. "But I need to get to the command center immediately to coordinate our response." "Go," Lorelei said before anyone else could speak. "Do what you must to protect our people." But Marcus surprised her once again. Instead of rushing away to take command, he turned to her with an expression of deep respect. "Princess or my wifo, I would ask for your help." "My help?" "Zephyrian tactical minds work differently than human ones," Marcus explained quickly. "Your people think in terms of harmony and connection, while humans think in terms of adaptation and improvisation. If we combine Zephyrian strategic planning with human tactical flexibility, we might be able to find a solution that neither of us could achieve alone." The request was unprecedented. Zephyrian royalty did not traditionally participate in military planning, and no alien commander had ever asked for tactical assistance from their nobility. But Lorelei could see the logic in Marcus's suggestion, and more importantly, she could see his genuine respect for her abilities. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I will help however I can." They rushed to the palace command center, still wearing their wedding robes. The chamber was already buzzing with activity, as Zephyrian defense coordinators worked to organize their forces. The tactical display showed the approaching Korthak fleet in stark detail, a massive force that dwarfed anything Zephyria Prime had ever faced. "What are our assets?" Marcus asked, studying the display with professional intensity. 12 defense platforms, 36 patrol ships, and 8 heavy cruisers," replied Admiral Korveth, the Zephyrian defense commander. "Also, the human task force that escorted you here, 5 ships. 49 ships against over 200, Marcus murmured. "We're going to need to be creative." For the next several hours, Lorelei watched her new husband work with an efficiency and brilliance that took her breath away. He analyzed the Korthak formation, identified weaknesses in their approach, and began developing a battle plan that used every advantage. Their smaller force possessed 6 months had passed since the wedding and the great battle that had saved Zephyria Prime. Princess Lorelei, now known to both their peoples as Princess Lorelei Chenau, stood in the garden, observatory of their shared residence, watching Marcus work with a team of mixed human and Zephyrian scientists. They were testing new technologies that combined the best of both species' innovations, creating weapons and defenses that neither could have developed alone. The sight filled her with a pride she had never expected to feel. This was what their marriage had truly accomplished, not just a political alliance, but a genuine partnership that was making both their peoples stronger. "The quantum resonance field is stabilizing," Marcus called out to his team, his voice carrying easily across the crystal chambers. "Try increasing the harmonic frequency by 0.7%. Lorelei smiled as she watched him work. In the past months, she had learned to read his moods and expressions as easily as she could read the thoughts of her own people. Right now, he was in what she had come to think of as his discovery mode, completely focused on solving a problem, but also radiating the quiet joy he felt when science revealed new possibilities. The communication crystal on her desk chimed softly, indicating an incoming message from the Galactic Council. Lorelei activated the device and found herself looking at the holographic image of Counselor Vex, a Altarian diplomat known for his cautious nature. "Princess Lorelei," Vex said formally, "I am calling to inform you of a serious diplomatic situation that requires immediate attention." "What has happened?" Lorelei asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The trade delegation from Rigel 7 has filed a formal complaint with the Council. They claim that your husband insulted their cultural representatives during yesterday's negotiations. Lyra Lay sighed. This was becoming a familiar pattern. Various alien species seemed determined to test Marcus, looking for evidence that humans were the barbarians they believed them to be. Usually, these incidents were based on misunderstandings or deliberate provocations. What specifically are they claiming he did? She asked. They say he ignored their ritual gift-giving ceremony and spoke directly to their junior negotiators instead of addressing their senior representatives. They are demanding a formal apology and threatening to withdraw from the trade agreement. Lyra felt a flash of anger. She had been present during those negotiations, and she knew exactly what had really happened. The Rigelians had tried to use their elaborate hierarchy system to exclude the female members of their delegation from meaningful participation. Marcus had quietly worked around their restrictions to ensure that everyone had a chance to contribute to the discussions. Counselor Vex, she said carefully, are you familiar with the actual details of what occurred during these negotiations? I am relying on the official complaint filed by the Rigelian delegation, Vex replied stiffly. Then you are relying on incomplete information, Lyra said firmly. My husband did not ignore their ceremonies, he participated in them fully, while also finding ways to include delegation members who were being excluded based on gender. If the Rigelians are offended by the idea that female negotiators should be allowed to speak during trade discussions, then perhaps they should reconsider whether they are ready to participate in the modern galactic community. Vex looked uncomfortable. Princess, I understand your desire to defend your husband, but this is not about defending my husband, Lyra interrupted. This is about accuracy and justice. If the Galactic Council is going to investigate this complaint, then I insist that they interview all participants, not just the ones who filed the complaint. After ending the communication, Lyra sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples. These diplomatic challenges were becoming more frequent, as other species realized that the human-Zephyrian alliance was changing the balance of power in the galaxy. Some welcomed the change, but others seemed determined to undermine it however they could. Trouble? Marcus's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him entering the chamber. His work clothes were dusted with crystal residue, and there was a small cut on his hand from handling the experimental equipment. Let me heal that, Lyra said, reaching for his injured hand before answering his question. Marcus held still as she used her natural bioluminescence to accelerate the healing process. Technique that had taken her weeks to learn to apply to human physiology. The cut closed quickly, leaving only a faint pink line. Thank you, he said, flexing his fingers. Now what's troubling you? The Rigelians are causing problems again, she explained, summarizing the complaint. I'm afraid this is going to become a pattern. Some species seem determined to prove that humans don't belong in galactic society. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I've noticed the same thing. The question is how we respond to it. What do you mean? Well, we could spend all our time defending against these complaints and accusations. Or we could take a more proactive approach. Marcus moved to the window and looked out at the mixed human-Zephyrian research teams working in the gardens below. What if we showed the galaxy something they've never seen before? Like what? Like what happens when species truly work together instead of just coexisting. Marcus turned back to her, his eyes bright with the same enthusiasm she had seen during their battle coordination. Look at what we've accomplished in just 6 months. Our combined technologies are already surpassing what either species could achieve alone. Our cultural exchange programs are creating art and music that neither of our peoples had ever imagined. And our military coordination has made both our forces more effective than they ever were separately. Lyra began to see where he was going with this. You want to expand the alliance beyond just our two species. I want to prove that cooperation creates strength rather than weakness, Marcus said. Most galactic alliances are based on mutual benefit. I'll help you if you help me. But what if we created something based on mutual growth? I'll help you become better than you ever imagined you could be, and you'll do the same for me. The idea was ambitious to the point of seeming impossible. But as Lyra thought about it, she realized that it was exactly the kind of challenge that Marcus thrived on. The seemingly impossible task that required completely rethinking traditional approaches. How would we even begin something like that? She asked. We start small, Marcus replied. We invite other species to send representatives to observe our joint projects. Not as formal allies, but as students and teachers. We share what we've learned about combining different approaches to technology, strategy, and problem solving. and we let them decide whether they want to be part of something larger. Over the next several weeks, they began implementing Marcus's vision. They sent invitations to a dozen different species, asking them to send scientists, artists, and philosophers to participate in cultural exchange programs on Zephyria Prime. The response was better than they had dared to hope. The first to arrive were the Centaurians, whose mathematical genius had always been tempered by their difficulty in practical applications. When they saw how human engineering skills could transform their theoretical models into working technology, they immediately requested a permanent exchange program. Next came the Betazoids, who were intrigued by the possibility of combining their telepathic healing techniques with human medical science. Within days of their arrival, they had developed new treatments that used empathic therapy alongside traditional medicine. But the real breakthrough came when the Dracorians arrived. The proud warrior species had initially been skeptical of anything that looked like weakness or cooperation. But when they saw the battle recordings from the Korthak, Etakau saw how human and Zephyrian forces had combined their strengths to achieve victory against impossible odds, and their attitude changed completely. "This is not weakness," announced General Karath, the leader of the Dracorian delegation. "This is the evolution of strength itself." As more species joined the growing alliance, Lyrelai found herself at the center of something unprecedented in galactic history. Not a traditional political alliance based on treaties and mutual defense, but a genuine community of species working together to push the boundaries of what was possible. And at the heart of it all was her relationship with Marcus. What had begun as a political marriage had become the foundation for a new kind of civilization, one based on the radical idea that differences were assets to be celebrated rather than obstacles to be overcome. One evening, as they sat together in their private chambers reviewing reports from the various exchange programs, Marcus suddenly looked up from his datapad. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice unusually serious. "What is it?" Lyrelai asked, immediately concerned. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "Not just with your beauty or your intelligence or your political significance. I'm falling in love with who you are as a person, with your curiosity, your compassion, your ability to see possibilities where others see only problems." Lyrelai felt her luminescence flicker with surprise and joy. "Marcus, how? I know this wasn't what either of us expected when we agreed to this marriage," he continued. "I know it complicates things, but I wanted you to know.